Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you're joining us from, for this GigaOM webinar on making sense out of chaos while avoiding vendor lock-in. My name is Larry Hawes. I am a GigaOM research analyst, and I will be your moderator today. I'm joined
collaboration at Forrester Research, and I teach at Pinchot University here in Seattle.
Great. Thanks for joining us today, Dan. Appreciate it. Philip?
Thank you.
Hi, Larry, and hello, everyone. My name is Philip Sheldrake. I'm the managing partner of Euler Partners, a social business design consultancy. I'm a chartered process engineer and also a director of Tech UK, the UK Trade Association for the tech industry. And of course, I'm a GigaOM analyst. I'm also the author of The Business of Influence with Wiley and Atenzi, a social business story with social media today. Delighted to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you, Philip. And let me turn it over to our sponsor, Harmony, today, and David Lavenda.
Thanks for that. My name is David Lavenda. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy at Harmony. Harmony are the experts in reducing information overload for today's business workers by delivering single-screen contextual experiences that let people focus on their work. I've also, in addition to what I do at Harmony, I'm also a regular contributor at Fast Company, which I've been doing for over 6 years, writing about business, technology, and startups. I'm a regular contributor at CMS Wire and been published in a number of other journals like Financial Times, Business Week, and some others. I just completed a graduate thesis looking at how information overload in organizations has evolved over the last 30 years, and I'm an international scholar for the Society for the History of Technology. A few words about Harmony. Next slide, please. And still okay. Thank you. So Harmony, as I said, we're experts in reducing information overload for today's business workers. We already have over 1.2 million enterprise users of our Harmony email and Harmony mobile products, which help users of SharePoint and Office 365 and other Microsoft collaboration tools work easily. That product has been highly recognized. We won 3 awards this year: the Best App Award from Microsoft at the SPC conference, and most recently the Best Enterprise Collaboration product from CRN magazine. We have a very blue chip set of customers, some of the ones you see here and many others across many different verticals, very large companies, medium, small companies, really any company that needs to collaborate and uses Microsoft tools to do so. We do have several strategic partnerships with Microsoft, of course. We work very closely, Gold ISV partners, as well as working very closely with the development team on future directions. We also partner closely with IBM, who OEMs Harmony technology, and BlackBerry, which offers Harmony product as the BlackBerry solution for mobile SharePoint access. We've also been recognized by some of the top analyst groups such as Gartner and Forrester. We were a cool vendor at Gartner and recently named as a player in the enterprise mobility space. And Forrester has spotlighted us in several collaboration reports and recently released, actually this week, a new report called Delivering Contextual Experiences Drives Business, which I urge everyone to take a look at. Next slide, please. So that's kind of about Harmony and where we've been so far. This week we are announcing a new product and a new product line called Collage. So just waiting for the slide to load. Okay. Still waiting for the slide.
Yeah, David, just go ahead and speak. It should have loaded already. But
Okay. Okay. So Collage is really the first personalized app for the multi-cloud world. So individuals and companies, departments who are subscribing to many different cloud services and have a big problem getting the big picture of what's happening in their business day in a single screen, because every cloud service surfaces information through a separate app. And what Collage does is it federates all those different cloud services, and it can be any cloud, business cloud service that an individual subscribes to, into a single screen, so that people can see everything in one spot. Next slide, please. So here you see some examples of enterprise cloud services that people typically subscribe to and would want to get a unified view of that information. So yeah, next slide, please. In this case, you see, if you can click on the build, so there's an animation here. What you see here is the unified activity stream, what we call the work stream, which brings all those different cloud services into a single screen, and also allows you to select information and view information by topic. One of the secret sauce behind Collage is its ability to automatically extract topics from the data being provided by the cloud service, and then allow the end user to focus or filter the information by topic, so you can very easily focus on the topic at hand, the task at hand, and then also click through to the native apps to take the important actions and be able to complete those tasks and move on with the projects. Okay, next slide.
Yep. Great, David. Thanks very much. So that's a quick introduction to Harmony and its new Collage product, which, as David said, was just announced yesterday, and I believe is going to be available in beta during Q1 of next year. Today we're going to focus on a problem that Collage addresses, actually. That is the sprawl of cloud services that exists within most organizations these days as they've begun in earnest to adopt cloud services, and the resulting information chaos and overload that's occurred because of that. We'll talk about some of the negative impacts of those things, but we'll also look at how you can leverage the diversity of cloud services ecosystem in positive ways, one of which is to avoid vendor lock-in that traditionally comes with enterprise software. We'll also provide some helpful good practices for aligning how business and IT approach the problem and try to resolve it. And then for you managers that are listening, we'll look at some ways that you can increase the adoption of these services and minimize the training involved with them. And of course, we'll leave a few minutes for Q&A. I will also invite all of you to use the GoToWebinar interface to ask questions. There is a place there where you can ask questions anytime during the webinar, and if we see a relevant question, we will address it during the flow of the webinar, or we will be sure to come back and pick it up at the end. Great. So, David, let me, since you've spent probably a lot of time, more than the rest of us thinking about this, maybe really introduce the problem set that we're talking about today.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, so what's happening is in this digital workplace, there are a couple things that are happening. One is individuals now walk around with their own mobile devices and want to do business from wherever they're working, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, laptop, and their ability to get information is somewhat hampered. So what they do is they sign up for cloud services. That with a credit card in your pocket, you can pretty much sign up for anything, whether it's project management, document storage, those types of things. And as more and more people sign up for more and more services, and obviously not everyone's signing up for the same services, at the end of the day, when you're trying to get a view of what's happening in your workday, you're working on a project with colleagues, and you end up having to go to many different apps to piece together what's happening. One app will show you perhaps the CRM situation. What's the status of the sale, of the sales process. Another one will show you documents that have been updated. A third one might show you tasks that have been completed or assigned to you. Another one will show you events that are taking place. And the integration of all this information, which is presented in different languages in every app, is left up to the individual, and that becomes extremely complicated to process. And the outcome of that is, well, we've got lots of freedom now to select whatever service is best for us in the cloud. It's becoming more and more difficult to actually get work done because of this distribution of disjointed information.
It's a real mess, isn't it, David? There's so many services out there competing for our time and attention, from Dropbox and Box and Google Apps and task management, from HipChat and Slack and Asana, note-taking applications like Evernote and OneNote, and enterprise social networks, Office 365, LinkedIn, Twitter, all competing for our attention. Wow. Yeah. It's amazing there's any time left for work, right?
Yeah, when you're not signing up for the next cloud service.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues that we face when we do that is that we end up with kind of a lack of what I call a consensus reality, right? So you're sitting in a meeting and you've been the personal integrator of your information, but all the people in the room have been the personal integrator of their information, and you can't read their minds. So you don't know what they've seen, what they haven't seen, what they've done, what they haven't done. And I think it's really taking us into a new level of fragmentation in the work experience itself, not just the technology side, but how we make decisions, how we get work done. I think that is, starting to see challenges occur.
Great, and that's a good foreshadowing of where we're going next in our conversation. Right now, I'd like to take a moment and poll the audience and get a feel for what kind of cloud service that you are using within your organization, and that may help us guide our discussion as we move forward here. So let me put the poll up, and we'll give you probably about 30 seconds to answer this. I think we'll get enough responses in that amount of time. So as soon as you see the poll in your screen, go ahead and answer it and submit your answers. And then we'll move on as soon as we've collected those, get a little comment, and then we'll move on and talk about some of these negative impacts of the kind that Dan was just talking about. Okay, so I'm going to give this about another 10 seconds. If you can go ahead and put your reply in. And we'll close this, and let's have a look at the results. So certainly, the incomplete and conflicting data is a real problem. Looks like this launched the wrong poll. I'm sorry, folks. Well, let's launch the other one if we can. Let's try this again. What type of cloud services is your organization using? Let's take 30 seconds and have you answer this one. Apologies for launching the wrong poll. Again, we have a number of common cloud services that are used specifically to collaborate and work together. And this will give us an idea of which ones that you're using, and we can address some of the problems more specifically around these types of services in our discussion. Let's give this another 5 seconds. If you haven't voted, go ahead and do that real quickly, please. Okay. So, clearly file, store, share, and sync is being used by a majority of you. And of course, a number of you are also creating and editing documents together in the cloud. Dan, is this what you would have expected to see? And why do you think there's perhaps no one using things like content management or task and project management?
Well, I think we kind of asked them to prioritize. I'm betting that people are using them, but we asked them to pick the one that's probably the biggest angst for them. And I think, from my experience, this is clearly, where we have a lack of standards, where we have a proliferation of vendors, as you heard the litany of vendors earlier. So I think this is where the pain points are. We figured out kind of there is ICS and iCal and all that stuff for calendaring. Contacts, we have kind of almost a standard for that that's usable. And task and project management, I think task management is, I would separate that a little bit more, but project management is very much an internal thing, and I think you see a little less of the kind of cross-organizational stuff. So I think that's where the real pain points are.
Yeah, Philip, what do you make of this?
Well, I just had a situation last week where I was sitting in on a meeting at one of the organizations I work with, and it turned out that a minority of us were rather confused about what the majority in the room were talking about. And it turns out that that majority had decided several months earlier to create a wiki, unbeknownst to the rest of us, where they were happily beavering away on some of the issues. And they assumed that we had all had access to this. But of course, it's part of that shadow IT. It's part of people not finding the applications that they need internally, so they're just riffing it off. They're just literally creating new instances. And this is happening left, right, and center. It's a wonderful facility to have, unless you actually want to get some kind of coherence in your organization. So we're just at an interesting point in time. The proliferation now needs to be brought under control.
Okay, great. Let's move on. Dan was talking about the lack of consensus about what's going on within the organization and lack of what needs to be done. David, could you expand on that a little bit? Because I know you've seen this in a number of your customers.
Yeah, so I think the difficulty is what do you do when it's difficult to piece things together? And I think one of the bullet points you see here about employees defaulting back to email. I think really there's an underlying thought here which may not be obvious, and that is email is kind of the fallback for communication because it's the one thing that's been standardized. So there's the easy way, it interoperates, you can reach everyone with it, whereas a lot of these other cloud services, as we were just talking about, people are signing up for different things and everyone has their own vision of the truth, but there's really very little coherence. And I think this is also going to play out in the cloud world, where eventually interoperability and standards will come to the fore, and this will, email will no longer be the end-all. There will be other methods that will interoperate and allow people to communicate. But the impact of not being able to do that is really just people don't. They get up in the morning, they open up their mobile device, they look at apps. Again, they see one piece. They look up their Salesforce app and they get one piece of information. They get maybe customer tickets through something like Zendesk, and then they go to Office 365. Very difficult to get a picture of what they should be working on. And when you don't have the right information, you may have too much information, but not necessarily the right information. You end up working on the wrong things. You're unproductive. You make poor decisions. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing. It's going to get much, much worse before it gets better, because as people and departments sign up for their own services to service their own narrow tasks, when people need to work together, it's going to become a bit of a mess.
And it's an irony, isn't it?
Right. So
we're trying to wean.
So, Philip,
Sorry, Larry,
so
I was just going to pick up on the email point.
Okay. Philip, one possible solution to this seems to be that for, IT could dictate to everyone in the organization the application set that they're going to use, rather than having the business buy their own applications. What's wrong with that picture?
Well, you can understand why they might go to forced adoption. It's only because we've been trying to wean ourselves off email for several years. We now abuse email. It was never designed to be used in the way in which we find ourselves using it today. And of course, the irony is that all of these new applications decide that they must issue status notifications to email because that's where everybody is, which kind of almost reinforces why you're on email. So at some point, someone says, hey, we've got to change this up. The only way we can do this is insist that people adopt the new collaboration software, adopt the new file sharing, adopt the new enterprise social network. And I've seen this. Again, just to give you an example that I've come across this year, there was an edict from up on high that every employee must log on to the new enterprise social network twice a week. It literally, I read the email. There it was, black and white. You must log on twice a week. And of course, then you look at the statistics for adoption and you find that the average comes in at something like 2.1 times a week, just enough to qualify with the edict, but it's just not addressing people's pain points. Forced adoption rarely works in my experience of a wide variety of organizational cultures. If you want to look at how to inculcate change, then it has to be from the bottom up rather than the top down. And I always subscribe to the maxim that it's not so much that people dislike change, they dislike being changed. So if together you can design what you're trying to achieve, then you might find adoption is higher than you might get through any kind of draconian enforcement.
Right. And Dan, I know you have some strong views on working together to create that change rather than having dictated. What's your position on that?
Well, I like it to think about co-creation rather than top-down versus bottom-up because, I have had several experiences where management or leadership has been extremely engaged in the active adoption of collaboration. And what I find is when there's a draconian note that says you have to use this and then nobody in management ever uses it, right? It's the, log on twice a week and then there's no justification or engagement that happens when you log in. That's a very bad thing. But if your direct manager and his or her direct manager starts logging in and the communications really shift to that's where value is seen, that's where I learn about things, that's where my practices come from, that's where I see a shift in behavior in meetings of people checking a social network before they check email. That's when you start seeing adoption, and you have to take it at that full cultural level and actually think about designing the experience that you want people to have and getting them involved in it and really providing value and a viable alternative to something like email.
Yeah, that's a really great point. We're going to come back and talk about that a little bit more later too. Right now, I'd like to move on and again ask our audience to weigh in. And unfortunately, I had launched this poll before, and we had some results of it that I'll put up now. So pretty much everybody that answered said that they had incomplete or conflicting structured data and that was leading to poor decision-making within their organizations. Let me open this up to the panelists. Do any of you have any specific examples of where you've seen that? And most importantly, what has been the result to the business?
Well, I think that, I've seen this over the years from, when we started doing data warehousing, for instance, right? So this is not a new phenomenon, right? Because I remember as data warehouses came online that we would miss a feed from place, and we wouldn't know that the feed wasn't there, and everybody was making decisions based on what this data warehouse had on it, but the feed wasn't there, right? And I think that proliferates now with in particular with collaboration and the Bring Your Own app, where you may have a sub-community of people who are communicating, and you know, the example earlier of a wiki where you weren't a member of it, that happens all the time. And I think that really, you know, it causes a productivity issue because you have to level set, be it a virtual meeting or a physical meeting. You have to then level set and say, what do you know that I don't know, and what do I know that you don't know? And that takes a lot of time that could have been done beforehand. And it also, you know, if you don't have time to do that and you don't recognize the problem, you actually make decisions on the assumption that people know things, right? And that's probably the worst situation that you can have, is people are, you know, making those decisions and they think everybody's either on board or knows what you know and you know what they know, and I think that's the worst situation, and I think we see that happening in public relations. You know, if you take any of the crises that we've seen in Washington, D.C., from the White House break-in to some of the stuff that happened with the Obamacare website early on, that is all, you know, management, lack of, you know, information and clarity. And I think, you know, we see it bubble up to that level when we don't pay attention.
And the acid test, or the biggest symptom I see from this is the quality of the way meetings are conducted. If you have incomplete and/or conflicting data, you spend meetings exchanging data, information, and knowledge, rather than
a sort of standardized set of information to people, at least a common set of data or documents to people, so that when we do actually have meetings, that we are making decisions rather than reconciling the picture of what's going on in the business.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point, and this is really the kind of problem that Collage product we released this week intends to solve, and that is, you know, getting everyone on the same page, providing information in a way that is digestible by the people who need to use it. So you're having all the information in a single stream, and then being able to filter and focus based on topics of interest to really allow everybody to get the same information and to be able to, as I said before, that you show up at the meeting, everyone's really getting the information from the same source, rather than, you know, I had an older copy of the document and then somebody sent me an attachment to this one, and well, that's 2 weeks old and I got a newer thing. It really makes it easy for everyone to focus on the task rather than on the you know, fleshing out who has the best information or where that information is. So I definitely think that's you know, that's the way to go. I think the other thing that's key, going back to the point of adoption of some of these types of you know, technology, not just how do you present it, but how do you get people to use it, is to minimize the change in behavior. So you know, there was a discussion about you know, do you dictate, or how do you manage change or induce change? I think one of the things that often helps is just by co-opting what people are already doing today. So if you can, you know, make information available in the same place where people already go to get their information. So if you haven't, you can create an app that allows people to carry out tasks in the native app that they're already used to using, but present it in a way that makes it just easy to, the initial information easy to digest. There'll be less discussion about having people do something else or logging into something else than actually focusing on the work at hand.
Right, so you mentioned a couple ways that we can create value using cloud services rather than giving into this sprawl or having IT dictate which services we're going to use. By having this broad ecosystem and bringing them together into a single user interface, by letting people filter that interface so that they can get the specific information that they need, and then also having the ability to take immediate action on information in that interface. You spoke about all those very briefly. From a technology standpoint, how do we achieve that? How do we get there, David?
Okay, so I think part of if you look at from a technology standpoint, the only place where you can really combine, aggregate, federate information from different cloud services is really at the client itself. I mean supposedly, theoretically, you could do cloud integration and have folks get together and try and connect the clouds and present the information that way. But because everybody's signing up for their own service and every department may want to sign up for a new service, that's really not a feasible way to do it. So what you really need to do is to have a way to federate the information at every individual client. And this goes back to the topic of standards. A way to standardize or to simplify how to connect to different cloud services is going to be key to making this work and scale to every cloud service out there. But the idea that every user can have a unique view of exactly the services that they subscribe to, and can also customize the topics that that are displayed, so that they can focus on the things that interest them in the language that speaks to them. And these are all very key. The idea of personalization, individualizing the experience, but not limiting people to the services to which they can subscribe. I think these are all extremely important technology considerations for making this work without having to do massive integration projects or to have to train people to use new technology, which rarely works well.
You're trying to solve a really hard job there, really. I'm just looking at the stuff on Collage, and the thing that pops into my mind is where you say uncovers and then matches shared topics across all cloud services with automated topic extraction. How do you do that? I mean, that's a big job, but you can do that, then you're taking off a hell of a load. Right.
So there's a lot of technology involved in that. That's really Harmony's secret sauce, and we have several patents pending on that particular technology. But I can give you kind of some of the considerations. So first of all, there's some machine learning involved in this, and a lot of smart algorithms to match different topics. The difficult part is if you create the topics too broadly, what you end up with is many different topics, and then it becomes extremely difficult to be able to focus. If you do it too narrowly, you put things in too small buckets, then the information inside is not really that focused, and that's really the trade-off. So what Collage does is it is able to extract information from things like structured data fields. And if you look at something like a Salesforce that has account names, customer names, status numbers, these are fairly straightforward. You can extract that information, and certain ones of those typically provide topical information. In things that are more unstructured, like calendar events and perhaps microblogging like Yammer discussions, there's an element of content analysis that's applied that extracts the topics and of course allows the users to customize, to ignore topics that are not interesting, to merge topics that may have been extracted as separate topics but really belong to the same
Wow.
subject.
Clever stuff.
Yeah, big stuff.
I think one of the interesting things is to take the analog from the structured world, because we've seen this happen with databases over the years, and we've got SQL as a standard, and there are variations on SQL that continue to exist, but yet there's still enough common standards and common data fields that we can and interfaces that we can understand how to bring things together, which has of course generated the big data movement, of which a lot of collaboration stuff and unstructured data has somewhat been left out of that. But I think as the machine learning and as we think about some parts of collaboration as being more structured than others, I think we're getting to the point that we're able to help people make sense of their world in a more consistent way.
Yeah, great. So, we've been talking about the technology, and I think what I'm hearing is the central premises behind this is that there is some level of interoperability in between all these cloud services that exist. But, we're talking about, are we talking about building point-to-point connectors? Are we talking about, someone mentioned standards, and can we wait for standards to either be enforced or to emerge from the marketplace itself? And Phil, let me turn this over to you. What seems to be a viable approach to creating this kind of interoperability that we need?
Well, actually, the two things you just mentioned there, I don't think are options going forward. Point-to-point connectors, for those who are not familiar with the tech, has a layperson's word that goes with it, which is spaghetti, right? So you are literally talking about getting a strand of spaghetti to connect one application into another application. As you can imagine, it ends up looking like a plate of spaghetti, which is not so much fun if you want to maintain it. Standards, on the other hand, are interesting as well. On the face of it, as soon as you say the industry should have some standards, well, what's to disagree? However, there's a wide recognition amongst the standard setting community in tech that setting standards too early might not be good, because we need to see different ways of working emerge before we start to say where we can identify some interesting areas of commonality. So the way forward, as far as I'm concerned, is this abstraction that David was talking about, trying to pull meaning from each of these applications, each of these platforms, in order to get them to work better together.
Right. So, and Dan, you work with organizations that are taking a strategic look at what their options are. What do you advise your clients?
Well, I spend most of my time trying to get them to actually figure out that collaboration and the way that they work together is a design problem, right? So that they're purposefully thinking about when we talk about the dysfunction of a meeting, rather than taking that as the status quo and the way things are done, to actually engage in it as part of their strategy, right? How do they think about making meetings, sharing strategic information, the professional development, all the kinds of things that they do where there are multiple people involved in it, that they think about designing those. And in my book, Management by Design, I came up with a methodology for doing that and really getting people engaged. And it's amazing to me that how many people, almost to a person, when I do either sessions with them at workshops or inside of organizations, they go, I never thought about designing a meeting and thinking about, what did people need to get out of this? What tools should we use, and how do we kind of reinforce the value of those tools, and how do we make that consistent? And when something doesn't work, what's the feedback loop for saying that, we have to shift something that didn't work to something that's working, and to actually ask people what they're using, right? And so, that's where I spent a lot of time, really, that blocking and tackling level of if we want to achieve this strategy, we also have to think about how the organization aligns to it, which includes the tools, the practices, and space as well, which is where collaboration takes place, either virtually or physically. And I think that's an aha moment for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. The interoperability problem is not just a technology one. It's also one of purpose, people working towards the same purpose, and sharing their work in ways that others can see what they're doing and understand what they're doing. So certainly the human side of this is as much of a challenge as the technology interoperability.
Yeah, because if you think about, tasks, for instance, you're going to use a shorthand with yourself, and even if you share stuff with people in a common environment where the tasks are visible, they may not know what you mean because you're using your own personal shorthand, right? And you have to think about those kinds of things.
Right. David, you had a couple thoughts that you wanted to add.
Yeah, so I think I agree with what's been said. I think there's a lot to be learned from things that have worked and not worked in the past, and of course there is the issue of market maturity and where we are and what's most appropriate. I agree that standards, are great and they will come when I think there is a little bit more time needed for the kind of the use cases to be fleshed out. But in the meantime, there certainly is a way to do lightweight integration. So the approach that we take of merging updates into a single screen, but allowing people to take action in the native apps, for example, is one way to do this. So the notification or an update is a fairly limited artifact in terms of the type of information that's being presented and needs to be integrated between the different cloud services. So being able to even publish an SDK to allow people to map to some abstraction model is a good first step. And I think we can learn from what happened with email. We talked about this before, that I don't know how many people remember in the days when email was also a lot of but there will be the next that we can learn from history to see how that's going to play out.
As well as the natural disruption of the new ones that are coming on once we get all those working together.
Well, that's the nature of the beast. Yeah.
Always
Right.
the opportunity for integration.
Right.
Yeah, so obviously this is a continuing challenge, and I think one of the strongest cases in my mind for this sort of abstraction layer is the fact that things are going to change, and if we hard code, we're going to be straddled with making those changes, and it's going to be too difficult. And as these changes happen, that the standards are lagging behind those, so we really can't count on the standards either. We have to have some sort of lightweight abstraction layer that allows us to normalize all the data in between these emerging services and bring it together. Seems like a good approach to me.
Well, that's where I see machine learning, by the way, because one of the things I'm seeing in the big data movement is that machine learning is starting to go out and look at the schema and figure out what it's about without a data modeler involved. And so we're starting to see computers interpret computers, which I think is going to perhaps solve some of the standards issues because we won't care. They'll just go out and figure it out and bring it back in, and no one will care anymore.
So how far are we off from that being a really viable solution for most organizations, Dan?
I think we're getting really close. I think there are
with each other, how that will help us avoid vendor lock-in and what the benefits of that are?
Sure. It's interesting because a lot of people in IT talk about an oscillation between best of breed, then back to single vendor, then back to best of breed. It's not probably an oscillation that goes from one extreme to the other extreme, but you're definitely feeling an ebb and flow from one pull and push one way to a pull and push, and the next year the other way. And Right, just the term alone, best of breed, implies that the single vendor approach can only be not best, right? I mean, the clue's in the semantics here. And of course, the big vendors want to lock you in. They want to cross-sell, upsell, and make sure that you've got it throughout the board. You're a Microsoft shop, you're an Oracle.
Yes, okay. David, let me ask you, from your work at Harmony on Collage, uh, how do you see a solution like Collage helping organizations get away from being locked into one particular vendor?
Right. So we've been hearing from companies, existing customers, very large enterprises, is that they want to go to the cloud for a whole variety of reasons. The obvious ones, costs associated with it, and also the ability to provide better services to their employees. And they're being approached by some of the big vendors and saying, if you go with us, we'll take care of the user experience, and we'll be able to do business intelligence on information and so on. But this really is, it's kind of a two-pronged problem. One is it's not going to help because people just want to pick what they want to use. Somebody tells them they got this really great app for project management. They're going to go and sign up for it, use it in their department, regardless of what happens, what IT says. And besides, even the organizations themselves don't want to feel like they don't have a choice to provide the best service for the task. So I think what's happening is that a lot of the IT organizations have gone from that mode of being a dictator to say what you can use to become more of a trusted advisor, and now are becoming really a facilitator to allow their employees, to provide for their employees a way to be productive by providing tools like Collage that allow the employees to use whatever it is they want in terms of services, but on the other hand, do provide the federation and the contextual access to information that makes it easy for them to use the information. So it's not that everyone's abandoning the silo. There are Microsoft shops, there are IBM shops, and so on, but it's just not realistic that you can craft a user experience appropriate for all business users out of that one stack and expect people to just live with it. I agree that tools like Collage are creating a new era that allow kind of the best of both worlds. It's not really best of breed, but it's best of both worlds, which on the one extreme is single vendor, and the other extreme are best of breed, and allows a mix and match capability that we've really never had before without having to worry about those deep integration issues and ownership of data issues and all the other reconciliation of conflicting data and all the other things that we're well aware of from past generations of this type of integration that people have tried.
Yes, and speaking of reconciliation, one of the things that needs to be reconciled in many large organizations is the basic outlook in between the IT staff and the business. David, you mentioned that the IT staff really has to become the trusted advisor rather than the dictator of what tools are going to be used. They have to work with the business and really pair up with them. Dan, you've talked a little bit about creation of work experience design. Could we take a minute and have you go into that a little bit more, please?
Sure. So again, in management by design, the methodology thinks about, for instance, it starts off with balance. What are the things? What are the tensions in the organization? And one of those tensions is either shadow IT or line of business, and recognizing that today we also see a lot of technical competency come aside, as well as another tension might be completeness versus simplicity, right? So they're not just polar opposites, and I'm seeing that in a space as well, where we're looking at task management tools. We're looking at the movement to some developers who are starting to use Kanban-like techniques rather than PERT networks and Gantt charts and all that kind of stuff, and they're trying to think about how do we simplify this. Whereas the IT department on the completeness side, if anybody's ever been on a product selection team, you go out and you survey the market and you say, what are all the possible features that could go into a project management tool? And you go out to the vendor community and put this RFP with this astronomical list of unfulfillable wishes that no one actually needs, but you have completeness of everything a project manager could ever need, but yet on the other side you've got people who are, how do I get my job done? What's the next thing that's on my plate that I have to get off my plate, and who do I need to communicate that with, which is what their real problem is. And so bringing that together in a dialogue, right, that's where the design comes in. Do we really need that completeness side, or can IT both be the trusted advisor on the technology? What's the infrastructure? What's the data look like? How do we make it accessible to people? How do we bubble it up to the right places when we need to? But on the other side, understanding that the organization has a very practical view of the world that is increasingly, with information overload and the speed of change, I think trying to simplify things. And that's one of the design principles as well, is how do we actually simplify things so that we can get both the process and the technology out of the way and let people get their work done. And as the discussion of the meeting earlier, of the dysfunction of going into a meeting where people don't have a clear understanding of what everybody knows, and spending that meeting time doing that, going into that with that clear understanding and designing that experience to the point that you are either making a decision, or if you're sharing information, you know what kind of information you're expected to share ahead of time, because I think there's still plenty of room for personal anecdotes and learning to happen in meetings. But that's a purposeful thing in a designed environment, rather than something that kind of randomly happens because of the necessity of, brought about by a lack of information. So that will give you a little sense of some of the pieces, and some of these can be quite in depth in terms of facilitating that dialogue between different parts of the organization.
Yeah, it sounds, listening to you, Dan, it sounds like communication and transparency are super important. IT needs to know what the business is doing and thinking, and likewise, the business needs to know what IT plans are. It was interesting to hear you talk about Kanban as well. Philip, when we were putting this webinar together, you had some thoughts about Agile and Lean and how those process methodologies might apply here. Could you expand on that for the audience, please?
Yeah, that's a great segue, Harry, because obviously Kanban is one of those tools that we find in Lean. Well, let me introduce this topic by actually picking on the title of this slide, where we have the words achieving alignment. That almost implies that that process might have a start and a finish, right? But increasingly, of course, there is no such thing as alignment, but rather a sort of a constant realignment and realignment. And that's because things are moving so fast today that the organizations we're in don't so much exist as just constantly change. And when you have that rate of change, then you need to have a response that's just as fast, which is why we're starting to lean on stuff from Agile and Lean that have emphasized this responsiveness. So Agile dates back about 10 years. I think the Agile Manifesto dates from 2003 off the top of my head. And Lean, whilst the name emerged in the 90s, actually has a 6-decade heritage going all the way back to Toyota Production System. And what's interesting about them is, whilst Lean has been focused on the shop floor, the principles can apply throughout the entire organization, including the back office. And whilst Agile has been pioneered by the guys in engineering and software operations, of course they're only developing software to meet customers' needs and internal customers' needs. So we can start to learn from the way in which Lean and Agile work in order to riff off those processes to make sure that all parts of the organization are as responsive and aligned to the customer and the internal customer's needs as they should be. And that's part and parcel of what we're talking about here. It's this responsiveness being the key to competitiveness. This in the 20th century.
Yeah, and obviously to be responsive and to move quickly, everybody needs to be working towards the same goals and to be working out loud so that we don't have to have these status meetings so we know where we're at. David, I'm just wondering, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, I'm wondering if you might have a story about a customer that has really demonstrated the ability for their IT and business staff to work well together.
Yes, so we've, as I said before, we have over 1 million licensed users of our existing Harmony product, which is a collaboration product. And I think the key is always in creating the common language between businesses and IT, right? So the model that we have in many companies is somebody will download, a business user will download a free product that we have. We'll then make the IT people aware of that solution, and that actually opens the dialogue for how the problem gets solved. So in that world, it's much more about business initiatives around SharePoint, whether it's project management or records management, social initiatives, those types of things. But it very often starts from a business user trying to solve a point problem, eventually making IT becoming aware of it, and that's not always a very structured process. And eventually getting everyone around the table talking the same language. But I agree with what was said before. Having the common goals, speaking the same language. Very often you find that IT people are talking about technology and business people are talking about solving business problems. They may be between what business and IT want to achieve, and that's a big bridge of not only achieving alignment, but also everyone's really trying to do the same thing, which is make the business more productive and more competitive. And this is a clear way of doing it. Is the proof of the pudding is in the pudding, right? So it just moves things along without having to create a theoretical discussion about it. Just here are the tools. Let's get moving and see how we move the business forward.
Yeah, it's amazing at the risk of oversimplifying. We talk about interoperability of technology as well as of people and different staffs within the organization. It really seems to come down to commonality in creating, as you said, common data models, common language that we use to talk about things so that we're all understanding each other. Fascinating to me. So for the managers in the crowd, what kind of advice can we give them about, as their organizations really embrace all these different cloud services, how they can maximize adoption and minimize the training for each one that's needed? Let me turn quickly to Dan to get your thoughts on that, please.
Well, I think we need to be, our managers need to be very open and exploratory with their staff and even their partners, contract employees and whoever else that they're working with, and really understand what they're using, why they're using what they're using, and to some degree, both aware of that and also being the bridge between the business and what people are, trying to achieve, and holding that, kind of facilitation discussion about what are the best things for us to use and learning from each other. So having a very open, I would say, kind of knowledge sharing environment is critical. And having, technology that to some degree helps get other technology out of the way is also important, right? And so, I think there's a combination of things that they have to do in order to, make it a viable environment for their employees to work in.
It's an interesting thought. Maybe you could just spend a minute talking about some technology getting other technologies out of the way. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, well, earlier with, kind of the machine learning thing, right? So when you get to the point that you have technologies, I think we saw some of that earlier with the screenshots on Collage, was looking at, I've got multiple task managers and multiple enterprise social environments, and I've got all these different streams, and how do I bring them into a place where I don't have to build the connectors, I don't have to worry about the, bringing things together on my own or creating my own user interface and being selective. The technology just takes care of that, and I can worry about what I need out of the information and not worry about the underpinning technology. And I think that's where we need to go with a lot of these things, especially where we've got emerging technologies and a lack of standards, as we've discussed throughout the call.
Great, thank you. Philip, what are your thoughts? How can we help managers here?
I just actually would echo my last contribution about lean. One of the aspects of lean is what's called validated learning, which is kind of as old as the feedback loop, right? You set a goal and a way to ascertain if you hit it, then you try something, find out how well it worked, you learn from it, and you improve. But it's the speed with which you go around that loop determines how quickly you arrive at workable solutions that people are willing to go with, so you can move on and build on that. So don't try and boil the ocean. Just try and make changes on a weekly basis. Just make a little change and see if it works. Learn from it. If it doesn't, then at least you've learned what might work instead. It's that kind of attention, that kind of discipline to that iterative cycle that to me, is going to be at the heart of competitiveness when we're considering all the things we've talked about on this call today.
So it's interesting. I'm hearing both you and Dan talk about emergence, and it seems like we need to not only embrace chaos, but we need to embrace what emerges from that chaos as well in order to move quickly as an organization.
We do.
David, let's close with your thoughts here, if you would, please.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the idea of not boiling the ocean, being very practical, trying things out and moving ahead rather than taking an overall kind of top-down, very complicated. I think those things don't really work very well. So I agree with that. That's a good approach.
Great. So at this point, I'd like to open it up again and invite folks in the audience to submit any questions they have. You can use the question interface in the GoToWebinar control panel. We are a couple minutes after the hour already, but we can stick around for another 2-3 minutes or so and answer any questions that you may have. So if you have one, please go ahead and submit that now. And while I'm waiting for any questions to come in, I would just like to take you also to our panelists for participating. Have a great day, everyone.